We can start.
Okay. So, hello and welcome to everyone. I see the 30 odd participants already joined in. And meanwhile, we'll start and let more participants come in. Although it was kind of organized in a very short duration, so that's why probably, but still we are expecting more number of participants. So, yes. Uh, I'm Jay, and I'm from the Center for Science and Environment. I lead the team on renewable energy program, and CSE, as some of you might be aware, is into research and publications, capacity building through trainings and workshops, and has been playing a watchdog role for over 40 years on various environmental issues, related to food, climate, agriculture, industry, and it encompasses everything related to environment. And we try and be neutral, and we try and do a kind of cross-cutting work as well on various themes of the environmental impact and renewable energy. So that is in a very brief, and more about CSE. It is available on the website. So I would encourage everyone to please have a look at the CSE website. For those who don't know CSE, or those who have very limited understanding of what CSE does. So with that, I'll straight away come to the objective of this webinar. So as we all know, biomass-based cooking has been really prevalent in our country for ages. And it has led to multiple number of problems and challenges. Uh, you know, I keep hearing various numbers as to how many people have still or don't still have access to clean energy for cooking or clean fuel for cooking. So sometimes it comes out as 600 odd million, but latest is I think 440 million, which is about one third of our entire population, which doesn't have access to clean cooking fuel or energy or overall resources. So the problem is really huge to say. And in order to basically resolve or to understand, what lies ahead in terms of providing access to clean energy options to our, especially rural uh, people in India, there have been various schemes, related to LPG and other schemes, even for that matter. In the early days, it was solar-based cooking or something. So there have been various number of schemes and measures that have been rolled out, and but we are yet to see the level of the penetration uh, that we require actually to understand and sort out some of the issues related to impact on health from biomass-based cooking, which is kind of very which is terrible in a way, and also indoor air pollution and everything. So all those impacts, cumulative impacts, are creating a havoc among the rural population in terms of health, be it health or be it air pollution, be it deforestation, be it all sorts of issues that are emanating from traditional or conventional way of cooking through biomass. So um, we understand these scenarios, and we are in order to dig deeper into as to what lies ahead in terms of providing access to clean cooking solutions to our people. The webinar aims to basically ponder over certain questions in terms of the scale and the challenges and the opportunities therein when we talk about large scale adoption of e-cooking options or e-cooking solutions to our people. And so the challenges are not just uh, 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 kind of simple challenges. They are multifaceted challenges, and we need to have a multi-pronged approach in order to mitigate and address those challenges. Be it the challenge related to uh, cost and affordability of e-cooking devices, which are very high at the moment, and you know the need of the hour is to make and develop and evolve the technology to make these devices affordable so that the rural population can afford it. Although recently, there has been certain policy announcement, subsidy scheme launched by the government that it will provide 30% subsidy to the induction cookstoves. But still, what we need to work on further is develop the technologies which are more energy efficient, just more in a way cost effective for the rural population that we see, because we are talking about here and about 100 million households. As I mentioned earlier, 440 million people, that roughly translates to about 100 million households. And then we need to have, in order to reach that level of scale, we need to have, a very phased manner. We need, a roadmap which is based on really, uh, targets, let's say 20%, 25, 30, over a period of time. So that is the level of problem and solution we are looking at. And it comes with multiple challenges, but at the same time, those challenges can be seen as opportunities as well. Although also we lack manufacturing capacities of these induction cook stores in our country. If we talk about the market size, even if we consider 25% realization, or reach to our population of 100 million households, it presents a market opportunity of 25 million households, 25 million cook stores, or that kind of market that we are looking at, and we clearly lack the manufacturing base, uh, let alone the technology evolution in this particular space. And last but not the least is the health of our grid system. Whether we need to also understand whether our existing grid system will be able to provide reliable power in terms of supply, in terms of quality to all those people, those who will be using uh, induction cook stores going forward. Uh, do we have that kind of capacity? Do we have that kind of infrastructure? So these are some questions we need to ponder over today. And uh, in my opinion, making the initiative or making the overall objective little bit of grid independent, we also have to look at the integration of DRE as to what role DRE can play in this overall transition from conventional cooking to e-cooking or clean cooking per se. So that is going to be very important when you talk about e-cooking, because grid alone cannot support this level of peak demand. That if 25 million, 100 million households start using the induction cook stoves at one point of time, because cooking times is the same, more or less the same everywhere. How that load or the demand will be managed. So that is one very important question that we need to understand, but not exactly, not now, I would say, but yes, going forward. And it'll definitely take, 10, 15, or 20 years to reach the milestones that the government is looking at, the sector is looking at 25% by 2030, and so on and so forth. So these are some of the challenges that we would be talking about, and we'll also learn from our esteemed panelists today as to what is happening in the sector and what are the best ways forward, and how we can basically come out with a holistic solution to this huge challenge. Um, and I'd like to introduce my panelists here. We have esteemed panelists with us, Mr. Sunil Money, who is from CEW, is a renowned think tank, and he has been doing very hands-on research on energy access, including the topic of clean cooking. So he would be basically taking us through the energy access part of it. And we have Ms. Samishtha Sankar Narayana from Rigveda Business Solutions, and she has been doing a lot of work on with rural communities around clean cooking and energy access issues. We have Mr. Florian Postel from GIZ, who has been basically encouraging DRE programs in rural areas, and he has published so many papers. And India's market feasibility and grid impact assessment report, uh, with special reference to electric cooking adoption. So with this, I'll request my colleague Noble Verghese to provide a overview of what the clean cooking space is all about and how to go forward and what are the major challenges, followed by our esteemed speakers, Mr. Mani, Mr. Mishta, and Mr. Florian. And with this, Noble, over to you.
Thank
And
you,
thank you
Jessa.
so much for joining us.
Thank you, Jessa. Welcome to all of the audience, and thank you for to all the panelists for joining us. I hope I'm audible to everyone. Center for Science and Environment has been working on environmental issues, multiple environmental issues since 1980. And for us, distributed renewable energy is a strong pillar of all our energy-related work. For us, there are two main beneficiaries that through which we look at all of our projects and all of our research. One is the environment, and the second is the energy poor of the country. So we want to make sure that whatever policies and projects and research papers that we're coming out with, we want these two beneficiaries to be at the end goal of all our work. Having said that, clean cooking is a very important subject that we have been working on. Now, clean cooking honestly has been part of the government of India's policy mandate for a long time. We've seen multiple clean cooking projects improve cook stoves, biopellets, even household biogas plants since the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s. Recently, the Bureau of Energy Efficiency came out with the Go Electric campaign, pushing for electric cooking. Now, electric cooking is a little nascent at this point, but approximately 1% of the population does use electric cooking in some form or the other. Now, we are talking about small appliances here. Refrigerators can also be considered an electric appliance, but they are not under this purview. Most of our work when we talk about today will be around induction cook stoves or electric rice cookers, although there are a gamut of other small electric appliances like kettles or small water heaters or electric coils or even microwave ovens for that matter. Having said that, let me share my screen here. Is this visible?
Yes, it's
Yes, no, it's very much visible.
So why are we looking at electric cooking? Why are we pushing for this kind of a clean cooking solution to be adopted? Now, we all know polluting cooking fuels, use of polluting cooking fuels is a big problem. One of the SDGs is access to energy, access to cleaner energy and health. Around a third of the world's population, about 2.3 billion people still use polluting cooking fuels. That includes wood or cow dung or agri residue or even kerosene in some places. In India, according to the 2018 National Sample Survey Office, about 120 million households still use some form of biomass or kerosene. Now that includes both urban and rural. Rural may the percentage is approximately 56, 57%. In urban, according to 2018 numbers, it's about 15%, but I'm sure that's changed over time because of large-scale adoption of LPG in the last 3 years. Now, why is this a problem? Why do we think about polluting cooking fuels as such a big problem for people and for the economy? So there's about 6 lakh people dying directly because of indoor air pollution. Now, pollution in all forms is hazardous to human health, but indoor air pollution is more so because of the way ventilation houses are ventilated, especially in winters in North India, because there is so much, even moderate pollution exposure can lead to drastic health effects. Not to talk about chopping of wood over time. 120 million households, if you can imagine, they go out, chop wood or collect other forms of wood, can lead to deforestation over time. Not to mention the GDP burden of paying for the health effects and the drastic health effects that the government, because health is a public service here. So So that puts a big burden on the government also. But the government has taken this issue seriously. It has been working for a long time. The RGGLB scheme, which was launched in 2009, which was renamed as the Pradhan Mantri Ujjwala Yojana in 2016, that has covered about 100 million households till now, about 10 crores. In total, India has about 32 crore LPG connections, according to the PPAC. Of those, almost all of them are working, except about 5 crore households have not gone for second, third, or fourth refills. There have been different biogas schemes also, as I mentioned earlier, and a very recent toilet link biogas cookstove projects that have been working in certain areas in India. Now, all of these projects have been working, but if we look at global measures to tackle indoor air pollution and use of cleaner fuels for cooking, India hasn't progressed at the same rate. Now you'll see since 1990 what data that we have, there were about 4.5 million people dying directly because of indoor air pollution. Now that has come down to about 2.25 million people in 2019. India was 1 million people in 1990. Now it's come down to about 40% drop. It's about 6,600,000 people. So India still has some way to go. Now, this does not factor in indirect causes, let's say cancer happening over long term or other forms that are not directly attributable to indoor air pollution. So why have some of these schemes that the government has launched and the government has been sincerely pushing not been working? Now, India has very good schemes, but somehow last mile delivery is always a challenge in India, especially the PMUY scheme. The LPG distribution networks are a big challenge in rural areas. Now, in urban areas, it's very easy, but when you have 300 million households requiring 8 to 10 cylinders a year, that's a significant infrastructure need in rural areas. Also, very recent oil and gas price hikes because of different crises happening in the global markets have made LPG unaffordable and also clubbed with the subsidies being taken away. So the middle class definitely is struggling, but the people who have suffered the most are the rural and lower social economies of our country. On top of that, we also, as a culture, have very different cooking needs across geographies. Now, the South and the East and the North have very different foods and the way they cook. But these are just cultural norms that can be overcome with enough behavior change or cultural solutions to this problem. LPG can't be the only solution that we look at. LPG is a good one, but we need to look at a 30 to 50 year timeline. Right now, we think that LPG is the best solution going for the next step, but we need a more balanced approach. Some of the major challenges to electric cooking specifically is because the consumer is not aware of various electric cooking stoves, induction stoves especially, the high upfront costs, as Jessa was saying, and also the grid. Now that is a very big problem because the grid in its current form will not be able to take even a 50% adoption rate in the next 15, 20 years. So we need to look at what needs to change in the grid. Also, we'll have Sharmishta talking about the cultural and the behavioral and the social challenges that there are to adopting a new cooking pattern or new cooking solution like electric cooking. We'll have both Sunil and Florian talk about grid problems, market problems, and also how can we tackle these issues in a more balanced and a long-term view outlook. I'll let Sunil speak now. Sunil, please go ahead.
Thank you, Noble. Maybe you can just share the slides, perhaps. Yeah. But thank you so much, Noble and Mr. Jay, for setting the context so well. You both have made my job very easy. Uh, right. So, as Noble pointed out, I'll be sharing my perspective on what needs to be done in the policy to drive India's clean cooking energy transition. Noble, if you can go to the next slide, please. Yeah. So before coming to the findings and the insights from our past studies, a brief introduction about CW. CW is one of Asia's leading not-for-profit policy research institutions, and we are a team of 200 plus multidisciplinary researchers. We believe that bold transformations are the need of the hour to achieve sustainable development from energy transition, which is a topic for today's discussion, to sustainable livelihoods. We are laser focused on the enablers of this transformation, which range from technology futures to sustainable finance. And with a footprint in 22 states of India and hundreds of research outputs, we are at the forefront of championing sustainable development in India with a global relevance. Next slide, please, Noble. Yeah. So at CW, we have been closely tracking the clean cooking space for almost a decade now. And here I'm showing you some of our relevant publications from our extensive research in the past. For instance, we started our research in clean cooking by evaluating the direct benefit transfer scheme for LPG, and that it was the first publication that came out in 2014. Post that, we conducted 2 rounds of access surveys, which was a panel survey with around 9,000 rural households in 6 states of India. The first round of the access survey was conducted in 2015, before the launch of the Pradhan Mantri Ujjwala Yojana, and the second round was conducted after 2015, after PMUI in 2018. And the next couple of reports shown here are based on these panel surveys. And then in 2019, we also released the roadmap for access to clean cooking energy transition in India in partnership with the Niti Aayog. So this is about our past work. Next slide, please. In 2020, we also conducted India Residential Energy Survey, which is the largest and the most comprehensive database on energy access and use in India. And here are some of the sampling details from IRIS 2020. We had conducted IRIS 2020 right after the first round of, Pradhan Mantri Ujjwala Yojana scheme was able to achieve its target of providing LPG access to more than 80 million households. And at that time, MOPNG was claiming that access to LPG connections in India had become near universal. So we wanted to just understand how that has brought about changes on the ground. So which is why we conducted IRIS in 2020. Next slide, please. Right. So, So basically, this graph has been borrowed from the IRIS 2020 study, which was specifically focused on clean cooking, and it shows that in India, the transition towards LPG as the primary cooking fuel, increased from 29% in 2011 to 71% in 2020, which was right before COVID. So basically, this shows that government's efforts towards expanding clean cooking energy access, especially in the form of LPG, led to significant improvement in LPG as the mainstay clean cooking fuel in India. The reason why we've shown LPG here is because India's clean cooking energy transition has been mostly about LPG, especially in the past 1 decade, and the combined share of other clean cooking fuels is right now insignificant in comparison to LPG. Therefore, the next few slides will also focus on LPG before I talk about why we need to move beyond LPG and consider e-cooking as an alternative. Some of that has also been covered by Noble in his slides. Next slide, please. Yeah. So, I mean, even though the share of households, using LPG as primary cooking fuel in India has, significantly increased in the past decade, it's also important to highlight that, despite universal access to LPG, more than 50% of Indian households, especially in rural India, are stacking LPG with solid fuels, which is also shown in this image, right, where you have an LPG cylinder, but households are still using chulha to cook their food. Next slide, please. Right. And this is the state level, picture. And we found that, eastern states have the highest level of solid fuel use and stacking. for instance, Odisha, Jharkhand, and Bihar, more than 50% of households were using solid fuels as their primary cooking fuel in these eastern states. Can you move to the next slide, please? Yeah, and these are some of the factors highlighted by the households who were stacking LPG with solid fuels. And as you can see here, high cost of LPG refills was cited as the most important reason, which was also again pointed out by Noble in his slides. And these responses were captured in IRIS 2020 survey, which was actually happened before the COVID-19 pandemic came to India. And as you know that the prices of LPG increased significantly after the COVID pandemic, right? So the affordability concern which was already there at this extent in 2020, it might have exacerbated itself significantly in the last couple of years. And if you can move to the next slide, Noble. Yeah, as you can see here, as I mentioned, that affordability concern has been amplified due to consistent increase in prices, as shown here. Here we've only shown prices till 2021, May 2021. But when the price of LPG refills was around 800 rupees for a 14.2 kg refill. But right now it's standing somewhere around 1100, which is almost 3 times as compared to its level in 2015, right? So now is the time, when we should at least, think of planning to move beyond LPG as the only clean cooking solution. Next, please. Yeah. So, and there are also multiple other reasons why we need to move beyond LPG. It's not just affordability, but it's also because, it's import dependent, and because of which we have very little control over its price, because it's basically determined by the fluctuations in the global oil market. It also requires significant amount of foreign reserves, which is spent every year on importing LPG to meet the domestic cooking energy needs. And also, it does not align well with the vision of Atmanirbhar Bharat, where we talk about self-reliance as the objective. Next, please. Yeah, and also, finally, the most important is LPG is a fossil fuel. So these are few of the reasons why now we should, think of moving beyond LPG. Next slide, please. And electric cooking certainly can emerge as the next best clean cooking alternative. And today's discussion is also focusing on that. And based on some of the estimates that we have carried out at our end, we found that at current LPG price, which is around 1100 rupees for a 14.2 kg refill, electric cooking will be cheaper than LPG for households who are paying a per unit electricity tariff of less than 9 rupees. And in India, very few households are actually paying this rate of tariff for electricity, because it's mostly cross-subsidized for households in India, right? So it will be affordable for a significant chunk of Indian households. But there are barriers because of which people are still not able to transition to electric cooking. First of all, people are not aware that it could be so cheap compared to LPG. Second, even if people are aware about it, there is significant upfront investment that is needed in purchasing the e-cooking devices and as well as the compatible utensils, which will together cost around 4,000 rupees, which is one of the significant barriers, because of which many poorer households cannot actually transition to electric cooking. And because it's expensive, we also found that households who owned electric cooking devices, 85% of the all the e-cooking users belong to the top 5 wealth deciles. Those were the top 50% households, and they were mostly living in urban India. So affordability is a very important constraint that we that is there in the way of electric cooking promotion. Next, please. Right, and we also found that lower power tariffs play a significant role in determining the transition to e-cooking. For instance, we found that Delhi and Tamil Nadu had the highest penetration of e-cooking in India out of all the states, because these two states have very low rates of tariff for households. So basically, there are multiple things that need to be favorable in order to see a transition towards e-cooking, which is, first of all, it has to be affordability. Then the price of electricity tariff, the tariff electricity should be lower enough to incentivize that shift. And also there is adaptability concerns because as Noble mentioned that people in different states have different culinary habits, because of which they will need the need for the technology, basically it has to be customized to meet their needs. So which is why because there are so many constraints that could come in the way, we have an approach which I will be discussing in the next slide. Noble, if you can move to the next slide, please. Yeah, if you can just move it one by one. Yeah, one by one. Right. So what we suggest is that we need to approach e-cooking in a phased manner, where we say that we should start with urban India first and then move to rural India later. And the short run priority should be to explore the e-cooking solution with urban India. And the reason why I'm saying this is because new solutions may continue to emerge. And Government of India has already incurred significant costs on expanding LPG access in rural India under PMUI, right? So we also have to reap the benefits of that. And because new solutions will continue to emerge, we have, Surya Nutan, which is the recently launched, solar cooking device by IOCL. ESL is also trying to, develop their own, solar cooking solution. So we are not sure, how the transition, what will be the available technologies, in the next 5 years. So instead of being in the hurry and just diverting all the investment towards electric cooking, we should first see how basically the solutions emerge and then figure out how to plan the transition towards alternatives. Next, please. Right. So which is why I'm saying that government should encourage and incentivize higher income urban households who have sufficient disposable income to transition to e-cooking in the short run. And the reason for that is because for them e-cooking is cheaper, as I as I shown in the last to last slide, that e-cooking is significantly cheaper for households who are paying less than 9 rupees of tariff, and its expansion won't need subsidies. What government will only need is that just drive the awareness campaigns, perhaps through the discoms, that e-cooking can be significantly cheaper compared to LPG, and that will also free up resources that are going into subsidizing domestic LPG. So right now, even though the prices of LPG refills may seem very high, which is around 1100 rupees for a refill, it is still being sold at sold below the market price. The market price of LPG should be significantly higher, but because there is a political pressure from the government, OMCs have not been able to increase the price of domestic LPG refills because it's a politically sensitive subject in India, right? So there is significant resources that are going into keeping the prices of LPG to the level at which they are today. And if urban households start transitioning to electric cooking, that will also reduce the demand for LPG in urban India, and that will free up resources for that are going into domestic LPG, subsidizing domestic LPG, and then those resources can then be used to subsidize the LPG consumption of the urban households. And I'll come to that later, but Noble, if you can go to the next line. Yeah, right. And also because urban India has a more reliable power supply situation, we also found that in the IRIS that they have lesser power cuts and lower frequency of voltage fluctuations, which is right now a very, very big barrier in rural India. So so I think then prioritizing the urban India for this transition at this stage in the short run sounds more sensible because of this reason as well. Next, please. And also because there's this another transition that is going on in urban India right now, which is transition towards smart meters. And with smart meters, what happens is that you can basically see the breakup of electricity demand at every 15-minute interval, right? So when we say that most of the use of electric cooking will happen during the peak hours in the evening and in the morning, with smart meters we will be able to understand, because most of the smart meter installation is going on in urban India only right now. Government is not focusing on rural India for now. So with smart meters, what we can do is we can basically try to understand the signature of the electric cooking appliance and how that is actually leading to increase in demand, right? So that will then help us in planning the infrastructure upgrade, because as Noble pointed out that, at current levels, grid cannot even, afford to have 50% of, households transition to electric cooking. So if, people transition to electric cooking in urban India, with smart meters, we can then plan our infrastructure upgrade accordingly, because we'll know the exact impact of the shift of electric cooking on electricity demand. Next, please. And then for rural India, the strategy should be to continue to promote LPG consumption, because we've already spent significant amount of money in expanding the PMUS scheme. And as I mentioned that whatever resources that were going into subsidizing domestic LPG for urban households, that can now be used to basically reinstate higher subsidies for rural households for LPG, and making it affordable. Next, please. Right. So yeah, it's the same point that I made, that right. Next is that at net LPG refill cost, we did this assessment using IRIS 2020 data, that at net LPG refill cost of around 450 rupees for a 14.2 LPG for a 14.2 kg LPG cylinder, most Indian households will be able to use LPG exclusively without significant additional burden. So basically, we can aim to reach this price for the rural consumers, while we see urban households transitioning towards electric cooking more and more. Next, please. Right. And also promoting the transition to e-cooking in urban India in the short run will also make it a more sustainable solution in the long run, because adoption of e-cooking devices in urban India will help in achieving economies of scale and eventually making it affordable for the rural consumers as well. And then because as more and more urban consumers will start using e-cooking solution, we will also get mass consumer feedback about the technology, because different geographies may have different needs in terms of the technology. That will give us enough time to design more adaptable solutions for rural India as well, and that will also give us time to pilot the modifications in different geographies. And then finally, transitioning from one clean cooking solution, which is the LPG, because we are focusing on LPG transition in the short run in rural India. So for rural households, transitioning from one clean cooking solution, which is the LPG, to another clean cooking solution, which will be the e-cooking solution, let's say 5 years or 10 years down the line, will be relatively easier for rural households, because right now, if we ask rural households to shift to electric cooking, they will be doing that shift from firewood, right? So they are used to using basically a biomass-based fuel, which is let's say firewood or dung cake. Now we are asking them to shift to a clean cooking solution, and it's, I think, too much to expect that leapfrogging from rural households who are not yet familiar, with the clean cooking solution. So yeah, so this is the take that we have on transitioning to e-cooking. But I'll stop here, and I would be happy to answer any of the questions anybody has. But yeah, thank you. And also, yeah, that's just last point. I think it will also give us enough time to expand the grid infrastructure, which is the major concern, and helping in making it reliable, cleaner, and greener. Because one of the criticisms for e-cooking is that grid itself is still most of the generation happens through coal, right? More than 50% of the generation happens through coal. So if urban India is going through that transition, that will give us time to basically make the grid cleaner, and yeah, that will make the transition more sustainable in the longer run. Thank you.
So, sorry, thanks, Sunil, for the such elaborate explanation on your work, and really provides so much of great insight. However, I have one or two questions to you. As you rightly mentioned, and while I agree that the e-cooking initiative should start basically with the urban population, but in terms of impact, let's say, since urban population is already using mostly LPG, or let's say clean resources, or clean cooking fuel. So from impact point of view, would it not be better to have a parallel roadmap, so that they can start with both urban and rural, while phasing out, or while discouraging the use of LPG in the urban areas, and promoting e-cooking in the rural areas? And yes, there are so many challenges around grid. starting from the household level, because in the rural areas, minimum sanction load is around 50 or 100 watt or something. And, with that kind of connection, you cannot really operate a cook stove, e-cook stove. So that makes all the more sense, to first take care of or set the house in order, from the grid side, revamping of connections and everything, and revamping the capacity of the grid. But that is again out of the purview of, let's say, the people like us. But yes, your point is well taken on starting this with urban and diverting LPG resources to the rural, but purely from impact perspective, because the rural population is at the forefront of receiving it, right? Of the ill effects of biomass cooking, that's conventional biomass cooking. So I would rather suggest a parallel roadmap or parallel initiative, both focusing on urban and rural, and with a very balanced approach would be more kind of impactful. Although it may not be rational at this point of time, but is going forward. And there is also another question that has been raised by the participant is the scientific awareness, about e-cooking, because as Noble was also mentioning, there are cultural differences and norms when it comes to cooking. So that is also kind of plays deterrent role when it comes to adopting new solutions, which probably Sarmishta will talk about in her talk.
Right. Thank you for pointing that out. And even in my presentation, I mentioned the similar thing that we still have the roadmap for rural India, right? But the roadmap is such that we are first focusing on LPG for them, and that will itself, have the impact, right? Because right now, what is happening is that rural households have the connection, but they are not using it, right? So there's no clean cooking usage at all. So what we are saying is, we're not saying that we are completely ignoring e-cooking. We will continue to focus on e-cooking. We will continue to conduct more and more pilots. We will continue to expand the grid. We will continue to make it cleaner. All of those things, all of the preparatory work, will continue to happen in the meanwhile while urban India is transitioning. But we should aim for rural India to transition to this solution, let's say 5 years down the line, when they are better prepared, right? Because this is what happened with LPG as well. We gave the connections in hurry, and most of them could not really, sustain it, right? So that's why I mentioned that, that the transition, if we want the transition to e-cooking, to be more sustainable, this sounds a better approach compared to, let's say, just, straight away, giving them the solution and then, they don't know what to do with that, right? So that is a roadmap in itself, right? So that's what I wanted to mention. Thank you for that.
Fine, thanks for insight, Sunil. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sunil. Thank you, Jaisa. We are taking questions. Please feel free to put your questions in the chat, or we do have a Q&A session at the end. We will be covering all of those questions towards the end, depending on the amount of time we have left. I'll now hand the mic over to Sharmishta. Thank you so much for coming, Sharmishta. Sharmishta, as Jaisar had introduced, has experience in implementing clean cooking projects, and she will share with us her experience in social, behavioral, cultural, and different kinds of similar challenges in clean cooking adoption in India. Over to you, Sharmishta.
Thank you so much, Noble, for this invitation, and thanks to CSE as well. If you allow me, I'll put the video off because there's a lot of rain here and there's a bit of network issue. Just to ensure we get more bandwidth with the video being off.
Sure.
Noble, I read your article on why we need to transition to better solutions along with smarter policies. Wonderful article. And okay, to begin with, I speak about the very first step of cooking, which is acceptance and adaptation, which is way more important than the actual solutions that we all see and have. While I do not deny that there have been a lot of global and local initiatives and a lot more interventions from practitioners, manufacturers, governments, consortiums, companies, and a lot more people who are actually trying to support the adoption of clean and safe household cooking. The issue is not, the issue doesn't just lie with, the solution. There is no one solution fitting all in this, because given a country like ours, with which we've already been speaking about, which with its vast geography, and each or every few kilometers, you have a different way of living, different environmental conditions and economic conditions and so on. We will, of course, need to understand that, you will find socio-cultural issues, and hence there is no one solution which will fit all, not electric alone, not LPG alone, not solar alone. So we as companies, or we as individuals, basically need to ensure that there is a bit of a study that we have to do. Of course, there have been a lot of companies doing studies on this, but one thing that I actually feel is missing out is giving prominence to socio-cultural and economic behaviors and points. We all need to accept that culture, irrespective of India or irrespective of any country we speak about, culture is a way of life, right? So it's been passed on probably from ages to us, or from institutions to us. So that's not easy to make people to change from their views and way of living. So therefore, it's important for practitioners or manufacturers or people who market for any sort of clean cooking, to relate to the social status of that particular group or that particular place, and then position their products and services. And now, coming to the actual cultural and social issues that we all actually know, but to reiterate again, and a lot of people actually ask me every time I'm on talks, or every time I go on ground. And anything that I'm going to speak now is purely from being with the grassroots levels, and pardon me if I'm going to hurt sentiments of certain people or institutions here. Like I mentioned earlier, so what has been there for ages, it's very difficult for us to move on, even though we have amazing technologies. And I would like to highlight a certain example that I faced when I was with my previous company, which was basically a socio-cultural example. Like, we were working in a very, very interior rural area, and most of the households wanted to actually adopt to the clean cooking solutions that we were promoting at that point of time. But there was resistance from the village head. Due to whatever political reasons or other reasons, the village head was not ready to accept, this. And we might be surprised, like how, such small thing as a cultural thing can affect the consumers, acceptance pattern or the economic spending pattern. But there's nothing that we can really do about it. But as people, as individuals, we actually must, as companies, we actually must, give a lot of prominence to studying the place, studying the people before we position the product or service. When you talk to, the people there on the grassroots at the ground, they always, of course, list out economical reasons, or other, reasons, such as they blame it on, the MFIs or the small banks, which would say they are looting us and they charge us a high percentage. And if they already have an existing loan, what also happens is they will not, get another loan to actually be able to have a new solution. And let's also think about the solution point of view. How many solutions can one particular household have? Right, we are time and again talking about the economical, factor, which is the biggest factor here, keeping aside the cultural and social. You cannot keep thrusting upon solutions and solutions. Of course, we do have a lot of households still to be, converted to clean cooking, any sort of clean cooking. But such small factors, such as these mindset factors and other things, is something that companies or consortiums or other, folks working on the clean cooking actually miss. And we do not realize that we may have a wonderful solution, but we do not realize that for the person to make the transition, a small thing like this actually affects them quite a lot. And I'm not saying that people have not been, giving prominence to this, but then this is still, something widely still, there, and very much relevant, because you may, I do not deny that there are wonderful policies, or there were policies, and policies are being trying to be revived right now at the center as well. But the problem is, it's like more like a generic policy, right? It's not going to be concerning more about these small aspects. It's not going to be concerned about, where to places where there are no electricity still, okay? And to be very honest, I do not, while there have been amazing policies, and I do not really accept that entire of India has been electrified. I do visit places where we are still trying to, convince them to have solar lights and so on. So again, it all stems from, a huge part of it stems from, the cultural and social, acceptance. Another small example that I'd like to quote is, I do not know where to actually place it, whether in the social, cultural, or economic, but it's a mix of all. There are places where, we still, for even as, being biased on caste, differentiated on caste, religion, and internal economic, status as well. So when we went with our solution, there was this particular village, most of them were earning decently with about 200 rupees per day. But then they were not really, of the caste that the village head was, and the person with, the better monetary, facility was there. And hence they were unable to say, purchase the solution, because like, no, they will not allow us to purchase. They will not allow us to have this. They will think that we are better, without them, and they will not allow us to do this. It might sound stupid. It might sound very, what do you call? Yeah, basically stupid. But then we all do not give prominence to what can we do about such, cultural issues or social issues. And I strongly feel that it's not just about the solution that or a product that you place, but there are things like awareness, that a company must, before they place their product, there must be a lot of, budget to actually, do a lot of marketing. And that marketing should involve, a lot of awareness, sitting with the people, talking to them, and talking to all sorts of people. On the whole, somebody from the non-cooking sector would feel, oh, this is something, common, it's something small. But then when you actually grow on the ground and, want to actually place your product, you will be surprised that there are a lot more smaller things that you feel, how can such a thing actually affect the capacity of the consumer to buy the product. So in short, cultural awareness, education is at most important, at the community level. And from that community level, it of course moves on to the next levels, and then, the acceptance and adaptation is much more easier. And a little bit about the economic affordability. Like I mentioned in just a couple of lines earlier, it's not just about the affordability issues, but it's also about how the end users have issues with the banks or small banks or other financial institutions. Because most of the users that I've personally met actually have complained to us that, they are already repaying loans, and, they won't be able to get, and they have repayment issues, and more so in the last, couple of years, or 3 years to be precise. A lot of banks as well that I spoke to, small-time banks and Gramina banks all over India, actually did say that there was a huge issue with repaying. right? So that's also a biggest thing. That's because of COVID. A lot of people lost their jobs. These are small time people who work in the agricultural fields or, somewhere closer to the, semi-urban, semi-rural areas, and they lost their jobs. So again, social, cultural, and economic things. So once you lose a job in the, towards the rural areas, it's very difficult for you to find another one, given the condition that, at least in the last 3 years, COVID and so on and on, and people really struggle. And hence the banks also change their rules and regulations with regards to, loans and repayments and so on. That's one part of it. And of course, the major part of it comes or falls on the affordability, quality. There's one another thing that I would really like to highlight, being a practitioner and manufacturer. I request companies, to actually give a lot of prominence on the post-sale service. Come on, we are talking about end users who are in the extreme rural areas and tribal areas. And similar to LPG, I would like to highlight that is something similar here in terms of, reaching the last mile. People do give solutions. They tie up with organizations and they place their products throughout the rural areas and tribal areas. But what happens to the post-sale service? In the last years of my work in the clean cooking sector, I have seen that a lot of solutions. They have one solution. On top of it, they have kept their pots or their clothes or whatever. So there are multiple reasons. We need to actually go there, be on the ground, and look at what are the actual reasons. That is something which a lot of companies fail. Because if a product is just kept like that, it means that there has been no post-sale service. And that hence, again, becomes a social issue where the people are not ready to accept more solutions or any solution. And when it comes to LPG, the mindset is that, where will it burst and what will happen to my family? And if you talk to the women saying it saves time for you to spend time with your children and saves time from buying the, going to the woods and collecting the woods and so on, all they say is when you use the word save, they'll ask, show me the money. Because to them, unless they see that form in money, they do not accept. So again, all these stem from, social, cultural, and economic issues. So the way we market, the way we educate people is utmost important, keeping in mind that, we need to give a lot of prominence to such cultural issues. And if I would also like to speak from a manufacturer's point of view, and of course, every manufacturer has the issue of funding, quality, and because from my experience, I've seen that if you as a manufacturer just give warranty and say that, okay, the product is this, product is that, and so on, people will still not accept it. And that doesn't actually help people change their thoughts about the product. So basically, it's mainly about, the post-sale again. So it's a lot of things boils down to how you, place your product and what you do before placing the product and after placing the product as well. The majority of the concern, because we have so many solutions, and why have we still not been able to, better the solutions? And all these studies, articles, and so on have been there for ages. People have been doing studies since time immemorial, I would say. And the only reason is we need to look at it from, a different point of view. And I personally would like to say that, the answer lies not in resolving through technology alone, or various technologies, be it e-cooking or be it biomass or be it solar or whatever. It's beyond technology. It sounds very simple, stupid, or whatever, but then these things have to be catered to. There is a way that we have to, help companies, give more prominence and educate the companies themselves about why they should give prominence, in considering, the social, cultural, and economic reasons. Again, one of a small thing that I would like to really highlight, which is happening for the last at least 15 years, I would say, a decade and a half, a lot of these youngsters are leaving, the rural area and going to the semi-rural or urban areas. And not many are able to follow their cultural beliefs or whatever. And that also affects in people accepting solutions, because who is left behind? It's people who are probably very old, and they would not really have the financial means to actually go in for a different solution. Because they already have a solution, or they do not have the means to go for a new solution. So what has happened is, all these things as well. That's again, land regeneration and the effects to it. There are wonderful companies working on all these things. And I think that should continue. And then, we should talk about placing the product. This technology definitely has advanced from what we've seen from kerosene stoves to, from mud stoves to kerosene stoves to everything. Like I mentioned earlier, and like I always say, there is no one solution that fits all. We need to give a lot of prominence to the geographical location and mainly the socio-cultural aspects, and ensure that, the entire regeneration of that particular land in all sorts actually happens, so that we are then successful in placing the technology or the solution, that we want. And then, of course, we can then talk about, and we can actually then see the change in the buying behavior of people, which is of course very influenced by the class, creed, and other things. And that's it. And I think if anybody has more to ask or want to know more about the studies we've done and so on, and I'm happy to answer.
Thank you, Sharmishta. Thank you for those very valuable inputs and a very critical insight into this issue that is not covered as much in, as you said, all the studies and all the research and all the policy making decisions that are done. It's always looked at as a large scale economic problem or a public health problem or a GDP problem or a climate problem, where first it should be what it is, a social problem. We have some excellent questions. I hope we'll be able to cover that towards the end. I think there's one question specifically for you, Sharmishta, that I would really like to ask towards the end. Someone has asked. I will hand the mic over to Florian now, and Florian will share his experiences from studies that he has done and also what impact the grid will have. Lots of you have asked about what cost comparisons there are and what grid impacts there will be if electric cooking is adopted. Florian, over to you.
Thank you, Noel, for the introduction. And good afternoon from my side. Let me quickly share my screen before I start.
We can see your PPT. We can't hear you. You're on mute, Florian.
Okay, I think there's an issue when I shared that nobody can share my presentation, and for some reason, even though I click on audio as well, it apparently stops. Okay, then kindly share my presentation. Thank you very much. Just a very short introduction. So my name is Florian Postel. I work as an advisor for GIZ. For those maybe not familiar with GIZ, it's a government-owned enterprise that implements the German Development Corporation and is active in 120 countries around the globe, one of them being India now for the past decades. Yeah, I hope I can answer some of the questions also and give some more information on that as well. I think, Noble, you can click to the next slide, and then I will just give some background information on where we are coming from. And I think that would also put some of the questions in perspective, because I think electric cooking is still relatively new here in India, many other countries as well. And I think especially in, for instance, African context, it's hardly discussed at the moment. So India is probably one of the front runner countries here, and many important statistics have already been shared. So I work for the iGen Access 2 project here for GIZ India. So it says, access to electricity. We actually started earlier also with improved cook stoves. So that has been already a long road until here. And now we actually talk about electric cooking in India. As GIZ, we are directly supporting MNIE in our case as our political partner. And this just gives some of the background information. So MNIE was closely looking to solar PV cooking. We also organized a roundtable with different stakeholders, and that was all happening in 2019. And then we said, well, let's maybe not look at solar PV cooking right now, mostly for economic reasons, not for technology reasons. And why don't we look at electric cooking as a potential alternative to that, and also for basically potential mass scale adoption in that. So that is the background to that. And then we did 3 different studies to explore also the role of renewables, and that specifically solar in that. So we did a market analysis, so to cover the supply side. We did a user behavior pilot to cover the demand side. And then we did a grid assessment study to look at the grid infrastructure. Without that, all of that isn't working. We started in 2020 with that. We concluded last year. I think it's a quite dynamic field, so there might be already some more updated information that, and we took quite a macro view. So there are lots of other research questions out there around this topic. So we tried to also answer the questions as best as I can. But I think, more research is definitely needed in this field. So with that background information and how we approach this, I would just kindly then ask you to go to the next slide, Noble. Probably to the next directly after that. So let me first give you some insights on the market analysis that we did, and also the user behavior. I will focus on the market analysis here and then the grid study later. We have lots of information on that, so please feel free to reach out to me afterwards. I'm happy to answer any questions, provide more details for those interested in the details here as well. But I will mostly focus on the main findings that we had. So we started with the market analysis. We did a number of interviews with manufacturers, retail chains, and so on. At the core of the study were actually surveys with 800 or more than 800 retailers across 10 states to cover also the different regional aspects in India, and then covered also some secondary research to see what our findings were. We focused on 2 technologies. Those were induction cooktops and rice cookers. I think that was also covered earlier. I don't want to limit it to these 2 actually, because I think if you have a reliable grid infrastructure, you have lots of other opportunities that might also be important for many people in preparing their local dishes. I think pressure cooker is quite important here to mention. The reason is we used induction cooktops, and this seems like the most versatile device to use, and rice cookers because it has some strong regional hubs where rice is an elementary part of the diets of people. So let's focus on these 2. But I think there are other technologies to cover. What we found out here, what you can see in the table, is that if you look at the retailers, induction cooktops are also the e-cooking appliances that are mostly stocked by them, and rice cookers strong present in the south, maybe also less surprising. But there are a lot of regional differences, and that is quite important when you look at electric cooking and a country like India, where these things really matter, and regional differences influence how successful maybe electric cooking might be. Kindly go to the next slide. Again, due to time reasons, focusing here on the induction cooktops and some key insights. Again, most versatile device that we explored here. More than 90% of the retailers stocked it, and we can see it's quite an established market. I think around 15 years ago, the induction cooktops were introduced in the Indian market mostly. Since then, you had many different brands, but Prestige being the market leader here across India. We can see differences in the regional markets again on what kind of brands are available. We can see that there's the highest demand coming from the more affluent states in the south and west. We can see particularly in the northeastern parts that different models are often also cheaply imported from neighboring countries. So that has also a different important implications there. And I think some of the issues touched earlier on after-sales services. Most of the devices are sold in peri-urban, urban areas and less in rural areas right now. And in terms of the connection or the wattage that we can see, most or highest selling units are usually 1000 watts and up to 2000 watts in terms of the induction cookstoves. That becomes more relevant later if you look at the grid part again. And costs are varying, starting around 1,800. I think especially during the festive season, the prices can be lower. But they go up to 4,000 rupees, and I think even above that. And when we did the study, we only found in the single hob induction cooktops, with one exception. Prestige also offered a 4-hob induction cooktop as well, but that at a price of 50,000 rupees, so not affordable to the large majority of Indian households. That recently changed though, with Prestige also introducing a 2-hob induction cooktop. And we come back to that later. Then please go to the next slide. And that's all based on the survey that we did. So again, from the supply side point of view here, not focusing on the customers itself, but what we figured out here is that brand name, and I think brand name here is associated then to the quality that you would get. So if people went to buy a device, the brand name seems the most important criteria. When we look at the concerns that customers then reflect to the retailers, price is the decisive issue. So for many, it's too expensive. And that's, I think, a crucial point here, lack of awareness in terms of how you cook and also the required utensils. So that many people are not aware of yet. And again, it reflects the price because the induction cooktop itself is not enough. But you need to buy the appropriate utensils, and people often invested in the past in their utensils and now you cannot use them. So important point to focus on as well. Kindly go to the next slide. We looked at the costs, and I mean, costs are always important no matter what you focus on. So we did a total cost ownership. I think Sunil showed a similar analysis, and I think this gives more details on especially the price per unit, at what point makes basically sense to switch maybe from LPG to electric cooking. Here we looked at the total cost ownership over a 5-year period, so including also the upfront costs based on the assumptions we made back then. What we can see here is that basically LPG, unsubsidized, and induction cooktops are almost equal. Here we had unit cost of 6 rupees. So I mean, there will be high variances across states for that, and 850 rupees per cylinder. So I mean, these prices, they change a lot, and this analysis hence will also change it. But this is what we had back then. So we can definitely see that electric cooking is price competitive, but depends again on these varying circumstances. If we just look at the market itself, there has been a positive growth over the last years, and also the outlook itself were quite positive for the upcoming years. So around 15% of the annual growth or compound annual growth rate. And I know at least from a few manufacturers here that at least for the last financial years, these numbers have even been higher. So there seems to be maybe some momentum, but the question is, what is this really then used for? How is electric cooking used, and what are the devices really used for? So does it really bring the shift that might be required to have clean cooking across India? So kindly go to the next slide. I want to cover this just very briefly because it gives some important aspects on the user pilot. What we did, and it's a small pilot in itself, so we piloted 300 devices, 200 of those were induction cooktops and 100 rice cookers in the end, covering 4 states in India. And we looked at households that had LPG connections and used it as their primary mean of cooking. but were grid connected as well. And the study focused on the perception of households. So we didn't do a specific calculation of the units consumed or the costs of the households, but really looking at the perceptions of the household. We tested the devices for 90 consecutive days with each of the households, did 3 different surveys in the beginning, midline, and end survey, and the households were also asked to report their cooking behavior in a daily logbook. And then please go to the next slide. Again, there's much more details available on the user behavior here. I just wanted to highlight some of the main learnings we got from the user pilot, especially on the induction cooktop cohort that we had. Overall, the feedback we received over this 90-day period was quite positive. And again, 90 days are not sufficient. So I think even studies that cover longer periods would be very helpful in exploring the challenges that there are with electric cooking, because it's most likely going to be a gradual shift towards electric cooking if we can see that. But people use the induction cook stoves. But what ended up, and that's probably the most important finding, and also reflected in other studies, is that LPG was continued to be used. So we see fuel stacking in the end. Maybe then less LPG, but yes, people continue that. And so it's mostly seen as a complementary device by many households. Issues that they were highlighted with the induction cooktops. And that goes maybe back to what was shared earlier on that being often social, but also technical problems. So technical side, we see the reliability of electricity being one of the main issues. When there was no electricity, households were not happy with the devices. In the areas where we tested where there were less electricity cuts, we overall saw more positive attitude towards electric cooking. The costs were also highlighted as one main issue here. We provided the devices free of cost to the household due to various reasons, but we could see that middle income household groups would be most likely to shift to electric cooking, or were willing to spend more money also for the devices itself. So these issues really need to be explored further. So these are kind of the main findings. And again, I highlighted the reliable electricity access here. And that's where I come to the last part of this presentation. So kindly go to the next slide. That is the user behavior, or the grid impact assessment that we are coming to now, that we focused on here. And what this means if actually a large share of households in India switch to electric cooking. As per Government of India, all households have been electrified in 2019. So this is actually a long period ago. And we can see specifically that reliability still remains a huge issue for many areas across India. So what we did here is we partnered with a Discom in Odisha. They were so kind to provide us the data, and then we simulated the impact of electric cooking. We used 2 feeders for that, one in urban and one in peri-urban or rural feeder. Just to highlight, this will not be representative for all of India. So this is really just 2 feeders. We try to select some feeders that might be more representative, but I think such studies would need to be carried out, basically for all of the feeders ideally, but also for different geographies, different sort of feeders with different criteria selected here. So but it gives you some idea of what kind of challenges there are. And we also looked at potential mitigation scenarios. So if we come to the next slide. We first looked at the assumptions that we had. So for both of the feeders, we collected the data and then did the load flow analysis and also time series load flow analysis. Not going into details here, but one important assumptions that we made here is, okay, how much electricity is consumed? And I think that's a very open discussion here. Maybe also we just took or basis on secondary research, 8 to 10 cylinders, and that roughly translates into 4 units a day. We had some discussions with other experts in the field. The actual consumption might be much lower as also devices become more energy efficient. So this would be an interesting question to really look at, because this has a major impact then on the grid, obviously, in the end. And yeah, then we prepared the e-cooking load profile. And here we just look at the urban feeder to give you some examples. If you go to the next slide, these are basically the different scenarios that we looked at, 6 overall, with the baseline scenario. And then we looked at, okay, you add electric cooking, but what are mitigation potential scenarios here, how to handle the additional load? That was basically PV rooftop. We then looked also at storage. There was battery storage at the feeder level, in the end, not at the household level. And then we also looked at demand side management. And here demand side management is not looking at shifting the electric load for cooking, but for other alternatives, because the load for electric cooking will be almost impossible to change. People will not change the hours of cooking. If we go to the next slide, you can see how many scenarios we had, and we had 2 feeders. So I'm happy to share this study for you to look at the details. This is just to give you some idea of how the study looked like in the end. So this is the scenario 2 then, baseload and e-cooking profile. The 6 method was the maximum baseload capacity at the consumer end, and then we added 30, 70, and 100% e-cooking load for the households. So we could already see that the feeder in itself that we selected was almost fully loaded without electric cooking itself. So without a surprise, if you then add 30, 70, and 100%, that just leads to overloading of the lines itself. And the additional load could not be handled without any additional mitigation measures at the grid level. If we go to the next slide. Just one scenario that I picked here as one example for the analyzers. This is then scenario 3, the base load plus 100% e-cooking and 30% solar PV, rooftop PV at the household level. Just to sum it up here, what we can see that the solar, by no surprise, is not matching the cooking hours and the peak load demand, which comes in India in the mornings and then again in the late evenings. So it helps for some, to some extent, but in itself, solar will not help with handling the additional load of electric cooking. And additional measures will need to be taken. If we just go to the next slide. This is just give you the grid flows for the same scenario. So yes, when we can see PV generating in the afternoon, there's less power drawn from the grid. But again, the evening and morning hours remain the challenge in electric cooking and these peak demands. So solar in itself, without additional measures, will not be sufficient. And let's just go to the final slide that I have here, just to give you the main findings of the studies. So yeah, the urban feeders was almost fully loaded, so there's not much potential. It looked a bit different for the peri-urban or rural feeder. That was not fully loaded, so it could accommodate the additional e-cooking load. But I think here it's more important to look at the household level and what kind of load could be handled here, because many households at the household level will not have the sufficient connection to handle a 2000 watts induction cooktop, and that is really important to mention. At this point, we looked at the feeder level. What we could see, solar PV helps to some extent, but only the afternoon, not in the evening hours. The storage maybe is not the most cost-effective measure that could be taken, but it definitely helps in reducing these or handling the peak load that we could see. And also demand side management helps to a certain point, but will also in itself not be sufficient, most likely, to add. So grid upgradation is definitely needed anyways. Without that, will not be able to provide electric cooking or reliable access to cooking to all households in India. I will stop here. Happy to share the studies for more details, to really go for you to explore those details. And then I'm handing it back over to Noble, I suppose, and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Florian. Thank you so much. It was such an eye opener for us, to understand the level of studies and the level of work that has gone into this activity, and so many things that came out really afresh. But at the same time, it basically provides a food for thought, as to us to ponder or certain questions. For example, one of the prominent thing that came out from your study and the talk is very high cost of ownership of these e-cook stores or e-cooking per se over 5 years time, which is around 52K, which is beyond the roof for rural consumers, let's say. So my my optimism is that it will drastically come down as we achieve economies of scale over the period of time, probably. But at the same time, we also need to work on the technologies, and we don't really have to go with the existing model of cook stores, e-cook stores, which consume 2000 watt or 1500 watt. Rather, there can be the development of new cook stores, DC-based cook stores, which are much more energy efficient and will require less power. Although it will again, come with different set of challenges. But I think that could be one, because affordability is one deterrent. That the cost is one deterrent. As you also have experienced and found out in your study, that the affordability, and also Sharmista mentioned this in her talk, that uh, everything apart, rural people, rural population looks at the cost, the money part, as to how much he or she has to spend on a particular thing. So that is one very great insight from your side. And as you talked about the load scenario, the base load and the load for the for e-cooking, I don't it's a basically a very complicated subject, because otherwise, the discoms, apart from the base load, they'll have to find different load centers, to divert the load, from e-cooking once the cooking activity is done, maybe around 9 or 10 or 11, something, around that time. Uh, it'll have to be diverted, and they have to find the different load centers. Third, but not, last but not the least, is plausibility of a cooking feeder. Do you think that makes sense? Like we have agriculture feeder, dedicated agriculture feeder. We have other feeders of the sorts. And do you think going forward the plausibility of feeder dedicated to e-cooking can be an option for discoms?
Yeah, thanks for highlighting those points. Overall, and I mean, for especially for discoms, it is quite a difficult subject, because I mean, India announced net zero by 2017. We're not only talking about cooking here, but we're also talking about electric vehicles. We are also talking about an increase in cooling demand. I mean, with the rising affluency in India, more people are able to afford ACs. But all of this poses new challenges to the grid and providing additional power in itself. So looking at e-cooking in isolation is probably not in itself the solution. So we need to also see the larger picture and probably additional studies on that as well, looking and taking all of these into consideration. And again, especially for electric cooking, what makes it so complicated is that you cannot really change the peak demand here. People will not change their cooking behavior now from, let's say, if they prefer to cook at 8 in the evening, they will not shift this to 5 or 11 p.m. So you will need to look at other loads if you really want to incentivize a demand shift. In the feeder separation, I'm not sure if that will work just for electric cooking. We have not really explored this in detail, so might also be an option to consider here. Maybe work closely also with discoms. When we worked with TPCOCL in Odisha, we also looked at the financial benefits that a discom might get. I mean, we know that discoms in India struggle a lot with the financials. So electric cooking might be, especially in urban areas, now provide them with financial incentives in I think in rural India, it looks again quite different. And there you really look at the economics behind this. And people will easily always shift back to biomass cooking. I mean, this is almost free of cost, or you can keep it to minimal cost. So this becomes always the challenge here.
Thank you so much, Florian. Thank you. We'll just quickly, we've run out of time, but we'll quickly stretch a little bit to answer a few questions. We've got a lot of questions from the audience. I'll just start with this. It's a really good question, and Florian or Sunil or Sharmishta, any of you can answer this. What kind of changes are we looking at in the future when e-cooking also presents, in addition to peak tariff rates? Now, if that comes out in the future, will that discourage electric cooking? Because electric cooking has to happen at peak times, and if peak tariffs are the most expensive, that might not present an economical factor for choosing e-cooking over maybe LPG at that time. What do you think?
Yeah, I can take it. Right. So as I also mentioned during my presentation, right, that here smart meter transition can play a very, very important role, because with smart meters, what happens is that you can actually understand the share of usage of e-cooking appliances on the overall consumption. And once you know that signature load, right, then you can perhaps, let's say, even if you have peak demand, what you can always say is, let's say if it ends up taking 1 unit of electricity, for one cooking session, what you can say is that, let's say, if 3 units have been used during these peak hours, 1 unit has been, charged at the, at the existing rate, whereas 2 extra units which are, being consumed can be charged at the higher peak rate, right? So with smart meters, actually, that can really help facilitate, that integration. So, yeah.
Do you have any inputs, Florian?
Yeah, I mean, I think it all depends on design, on how you do it. I mean, I think Sunil already covered that. So there are many options out there, and I mean, again, we are just at the start of electric cooking. And this is, I think, one additional point. If we look at the policies right now that are in place, I think from the government's point of view, it's not clear which directions India is heading right now, because you still have, or you have different ministries looking at different priorities. You have the Go Electric campaign. MNIE is more looking at, can we really look into solar cooking for rural households, where maybe also the grid infrastructure isn't there. Then you have LPG still with Ministry of Petroleum and Gas. So I think they're also, first of all, the government of India should decide which direction we want to head, and hence accordingly, how do we place our funding that we have and our government spending that we can do. My personal opinion here is what we can see, that, I mean, the grid needs to come anyways, and you need to have a 24/7 reliable grid. So ideally, this should play a major role. There might always be certain remote areas where you look at other solutions for clean cooking, but there's a lot of potential for how you design these things also later, also dealing with the peak in the tariff, or the peak demand and the tariffs that come with it itself. So I think there we're still in the beginning, and maybe we can also, and I'm not sure how other countries do it, but maybe you can also learn there from international best practices in how you can deal with the social impact that would come otherwise here for households. One final point, awareness is still also relatively low, and also understanding the costs of it. Households and humans in general, we're often not good at looking into long-term perspective, but at this moment now and what we need to spend, the high upfront costs have been highlighted in our studies. And here you also need to address really the poorer households. How can you really encourage them, providing them a clean cooking solution, and what are means for them, and how can you do this? I think with LPG that was done to get them the connection, but the long-term perspective was often missing here. So how can we deal with these things to really ensure a reliable solution for the future?
So we need a more long-term approach to policy making instead of just pushing for right now clean or cleaner solutions. Which brings me to my next question. who should be the one leading this charge in India electric cooking? So we see LPG was pushed mainly by, and they had a very good model, and in urban India LPG adoption increased very significantly, as you showed, Sunil. But e-cooking, who should take it? Should the Bureau of Energy Efficiency, or should it be OMCs again, or should the discoms, should private players? Like, what do you think, Sharmishta, Sunil, Florian, any of you?
Just a couple of cents from my side. One major thing I would like to highlight is that, of course, we all rely on central, but let me give you a very good example from the very recent time, just a month ago. We had changes in the Karnataka government, right? It's not always the center frames policies, but then when it comes to adoption of that, it's different in the state. They have their own policies as well, right? So that's something which we need to look at, how to bridge the gap between the central and the state policies. It's completely different and it's extremely difficult, having been in the ground and my experience in that. And we just cannot say that there's one person or one particular organization or anybody who can let this change happen. We all have to work together as a family in clean cooking or any form of clean cooking. It's not possible by one person or one organization. If it had been possible by just one body or organization, it would have been done, long back. We need to think from both, from the government point of view, from the end users point of view, and from the manufacturers point of view. Because again, the question arises, how are you going to manufacture this electricity? Is it going to be not just about manufacturing, but it's also about the sustainable use of it? Is that solution sustainable? How are you going to manufacture? So there are a lot of attributes to it that we must look at. And the entire, the clean cooking family has to come together to make these changes. And I always keep talking endless about awareness, and that is something which helps us in adoption and sustainable use. Otherwise, we have seen a lot of cases where there has been, what's the right term, de-adoption, happening as well of a lot of solutions. It's just stacked on, or, people just don't, they just go back to their original comfortable ways of, cooking.
I would just add to this. I think 100% I would agree with that. I mean, it's not one player who can take this at the central level. You will need to involve different ministries. I think I saw this question also earlier. I mean, right now, if we talk about clean cooking, when it comes to electricity, what means clean here? Because the electricity that we consume is not clean if 70% of that comes from coal. So they automatically you have RE in there. So that means MNRE needs to be involved, for instance. When you look at the grid, that doesn't come under the responsibility of MNRE. Here you look at Ministry of Power, you look at BE, you look at others as well. And really important, I mean, yes, it is a technical challenge that we can see. There we have, I think, solutions, but it is also, and I highlighted earlier, a big social questions. And how can we do this? And that means bringing the private sector in, looking at maybe also policy that encourages private sector, but also bringing in NGOs who work on the ground, looking also at the end user. And here end user specifically, we need to look at women as well, who are the ones who mostly cook in India. So bringing in their voices and hearing them also plays a significant role in this entire transition that we look at. So coming up with these formats and how you can ensure that all of them are heard and integrated, naming the discoms here as well, is a major challenge, but needs to happen if you want to get there.
Do you have any points, Sunil?
No, I think Sharmishta and Florian have already covered much of what I wanted to say. Just one point I want to add. Even for LPG, if we saw MOPNG and the OMCs making all the effort, when it comes to PMUI, but we've not been able to witness the kind of change that we had expected, right? In rural India, we still do not see sustained transition towards clean cooking fuels. And now we are talking about involving, let's say, Ministry of Rural Development, state rural livelihood missions, right? So all of these parties into the picture, right? So that, we can improve the last mile delivery of LPG and make it more affordable through, let's say, microfinance facilities, right? So then this naturally brings in, multiple different partners, right? If we want to see that sustained transition towards LPG. So eventually we will need that sort of a collective effort. So I think, as Sharmisha pointed out, I think it would be very important to, just from the very beginning, have that strategy so that, each and every player can, contribute their bit. But still, I think ESL, is one of the agencies which has, implemented, schemes like Ujala in the past, right, on the ground. So they can certainly take the lead and, in basically, doing that sort of a demand aggregation to basically bring down the prices of cooking devices. But, beyond that, we will still, after that stage, we will still need involvement from multiple different, ministries and departments, as Florian just pointed out. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you so much, all of you. Thank you to all the audience. We've unfortunately overshot our time. There are a lot of good questions. There's a lot of discussion happening, and I wish we could cover all of that, but unfortunately, we'll have to stop now. Feel free, if you have more questions or if you want have something unanswered or if you want to discuss, feel free to email us. The email and the link has been provided in the chat. You can download the presentations there from the website. And thank you so much. So India seems like it is on the right track, but needs to think in a more long-term perspective and have a more transitional view to improve and look at clean cooking, especially electric cooking, rather than forcing electric cooking right now onto geographies that perhaps are not ready right now. Thank you so much, Florian, Sunil, and Sharmisha for your time. Thank you, Jayasa. Thank you to all the audience, and hope you have a good day. And we hope to continue this conversation. This is just the start of clean cooking for our efforts. Thank you so much.